First Lieutenant Anya Petrova stood ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance, a small speck of dust on the far wall of the hangar. The air was thick with the scent of diesel, old grease, and the nervous energy of 458 of the finest soldiers in the fleet. They were assembled in the massive hangar bay of the battleship Prometheus, a cathedral of steel and military might. The occasion was a formal inspection by Admiral Theron Vance, a man whose reputation was as large and as fearsome as the battleship itself. He was a legend, a veteran of countless battles, and a man known for his fiery temper and his unyielding demand for perfection. He was also known for his cruelty, a flaw that was often overlooked in the face of his tactical genius. Anya had heard the stories, tales of his verbal lashings, his public humiliations of officers who did not meet his standards, and his casual disregard for anyone he deemed lesser. She was a quiet woman, small in stature, but with a backbone of steel. She had earned her rank through sheer tenacity and a mind that could untangle the most complex logistical problems in minutes. She was the best logistics officer in the fleet, a fact that was often ignored because of her gender and her rank. She was a first lieutenant, a junior officer, and in the eyes of Admiral Vance, she was a nonentity. The inspection began with the Admiral's grand entrance. He walked with a heavy gait, his chest adorned with medals, his face a grim mask of dissatisfaction. He was followed by a retinue of junior officers, all of them a head taller than him, and all of them in a state of constant, palpable fear. He strode through the lines of soldiers, his eyes scanning every detail, his presence a dark cloud that enveloped everyone he passed. He stopped in front of a young private, his eyes narrowing in on a single, minuscule smudge on the private's boot. The private's face went pale, as the Admiral's voice, a low rumble of thunder, echoed through the vast space. "Private," he said, his voice laced with venom. "Did you polish your boots with mud? Is that what you did?" The private, a boy no older than 18, could not speak. He just stood there, his eyes wide with fear. The Admiral's face turned a shade of crimson, and he raised his hand as if to strike the boy. A hush fell over the crowd of soldiers. Anya, who was standing a few feet away, felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was not an inspection. This was a performance. Just as the Admiral was about to bring his hand down on the boy's face, a sharp, clear voice cut through the silence. "Admiral, with all due respect, the private's boots are polished to regulation. I believe the smudge you are seeing is an optical illusion from the angle of the light." The Admiral's hand stopped mid-air. He turned his head slowly, his eyes, which had been fixed on the private, now fixed on Anya. The silence was absolute. Hush. Everyone in the hangar held their breath. This was a moment that would be remembered for a lifetime. Anya did not flinch. She just stood there, her eyes meeting his without a hint of fear. She was not a fighter. She was a logistics officer. But she was also a soldier, and she could not stand by while a superior officer abused a junior one. The Admiral's face, which had been red with anger, now turned a pasty white. He walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped in front of her, his face inches from hers. "And who are you?" he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "First Lieutenant Anya Petrova, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. "First Lieutenant Petrova," he said, the name a curse on his tongue. "You have the audacity to challenge my judgment. You, a junior officer, a woman, a logistics officer, dare to speak to me in this manner?" "I was not challenging your judgment, sir," she said, her voice still unwavering. "I was merely pointing out a fact. The private's boots are polished. Smudge is not a smudge, it is the light." The Admiral's face turned crimson again. He raised his hand, not to strike the boy, but to strike her. The motion was a blur of anger and hatred. He was going to hit her. In front of 458 soldiers, a wave of outrage, cold and sharp, washed over Anya. She did not think. She did not analyze. She reacted. As his hand came toward her face, she grabbed his wrist, her fingers a steel vise around his arm. She twisted his arm in a single brutal motion, a motion that was not born of martial arts or combat training, but of pure, unadulterated instinct. The sound was a sickening crack, a sound that echoed through the hangar like a gunshot. The Admiral's face, which had been a mask of rage, now turned to a mask of shock and pain. His eyes, wide with disbelief, stared at her as she let go of his arm. He fell to his knees, his broken arm dangling uselessly at his side. The hangar was now a scene of utter chaos. The soldiers, who had been standing in silent formation, now broke ranks, a wave of noise and movement washing over the scene. The Admiral's retinue rushed to his side, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Anya stood there, her heart pounding a furious rhythm in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of shock and adrenaline. What had she done? She had assaulted a superior officer, an admiral, in front of the entire fleet. This was not a minor infraction. This was a court-martial offense. This was a career-ending, life-faltering mistake. She was finished. Her dreams, her hard-earned rank, her life as a soldier were all over. But as she looked at the admiral, who was now being helped to his feet by his retinue, she did not feel regret. She felt a fierce, primal satisfaction. She had stood up for what was right. She had stood up for the private, for herself, for every soldier who had ever been abused by a man with too much power and not enough humanity. The next few hours were a blur. She was taken into custody, her hands cuffed behind her back. She was questioned by a dozen different officers, all of them asking the same questions. All of them looking at her with a mixture of disbelief and awe. She was not a criminal. She was a hero. But in the eyes of the military justice system, the line was often blurred. The investigation was a long and arduous process. The admiral, now in a cast, was demanding her head on a platter. He wanted her dishonorably discharged, and he wanted her to serve a long prison sentence. He was a powerful man, and his word was law. But the 458 soldiers who had witnessed the event were not so easily silenced. The private, the boy with the smudge on his boot, was the first to speak. He told the investigators that the admiral was about to hit him. He described the look on the admiral's face, the fear he had felt, and the sound of Anya's voice, a voice that had saved him from public humiliation. His testimony was a powerful indictment of the admiral's character and a powerful defense of Anya's actions. One by one, the other soldiers came forward. They spoke of the admiral's cruelty, his casual disregard for their humanity, and the fear he had instilled in them. They spoke of Anya, of her quiet competence, her fierce loyalty, and her unwavering sense of justice. They spoke of the moment she had snapped his arm, not as an act of violence, but as an act of defiance, a moment of justice in a world that was often unjust. The court-martial was held in the same hangar bay where the incident had occurred. The mood was somber, but there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. The admiral, his arm in a cast, his face a mask of rage and humiliation, sat on one side of the courtroom. Anya, her face calm and serene, sat on the other. The prosecution painted her as a rogue officer, an insubordinate soldier who had no respect for the chain of command. They spoke of the sanctity of military discipline, the importance of respect for superior officers, and the need to maintain order at all costs. They argued that her actions, while perhaps born of a noble intention, were a grave threat to the very foundation of the military. The defense, led by a young and brilliant lawyer, painted a different picture. They spoke of the unwritten rules of the military, the code of honor, the sacred trust between officers and the men and women they command. They spoke of the admiral's abuse, his long history of cruelty, and his casual disregard for the humanity of his soldiers. They spoke of Anya, not as a rogue officer, but as a hero, a woman who had stood up for what was right when no one else would. The trial lasted for days. The testimony was emotional, powerful, and often contradictory. But in the end, the jury, a panel of senior officers, had to make a decision. Decision that would not only determine Anya's fate, but also the fate of the military itself. The verdict was a long time in coming. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, a heavy blanket that weighed down on everyone present. The judge, a stoic and unreadable man, cleared his throat, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. "The jury has reached a verdict," he said. Anya's heart pounded in her chest. She did not know what to expect. She could be dishonorably discharged. She could go to prison. Or she could be exonerated. "On the charge of assault on a superior officer," the judge said, his voice a drone, "the jury finds the defendant."
"I'm guilty."
A collective gasp of shock and relief echoed through the courtroom. The admiral's face, which had been a mask of expectation, now turned to a mask of utter disbelief. Anya, her face still calm, felt a single tear roll down her cheek. The judge continued. "On the charge of insubordination," he said, The jury finds the defendant not guilty. The relief in the room was palpable. Soldiers who had been sitting in silent anticipation now began to murmur. The verdict was a victory, not just for Anya, but for every soldier who had ever been abused by a superior officer. The judge, a man who had seen 1,000 trials, looked at Anya, a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. Admiration. He then looked at the admiral, a look of profound disappointment on his face. This court finds that Admiral Vance's conduct was unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman, he said. He is hereby reprimanded and is relieved of his command. The admiral's face, a mask of rage and humiliation, was a sight to behold. He had lost. He had not only lost his arm, he had lost his career, his reputation, his life. He had lost everything. Anya was a hero. Her actions had not only saved a private from humiliation, but she had also exposed a deep-seated problem in the military, a culture of abuse and impunity that had been allowed to fester for years. Her story became a legend, a tale whispered in the barracks and told around campfires. She was a woman who had stood up to a powerful man, a woman who had fought for justice, a woman who had won. She did not go on to become an admiral herself. She was not a fighter. She was a logistics officer. But she did continue her service, her reputation as a woman of integrity and courage preceding her wherever she went. Her actions had changed the military for the better, a small but profound shift in a culture that was slow to change. Her story was a testament to the power of a single individual, a single act of defiance, a single moment of courage. She was a legend, a hero, a woman who had stood her ground, and in doing so, had changed the world.